Chris Stokes, who is a student here at Washington College. Chris, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'm Christopher Stokes. I am a student here at Washington College. I'm a psychology and English major, creative writing minor, and I just love photography. I first came to Washington College and did the boot camp with you, Brian, and got to shoot, models and stuff, and it was just a fun time.
And we're standing here in front of the Photography Exposed Interactive Photography Exhibit, and this is kind of like a traditional photography exhibit, and it's got your photos, your prints, along with the artist's name and the description, but it also has an interactive component that is, I guess, something that we haven't seen before, and is unique, as far as I understand, to this exhibit.
Every photo has one of these QR codes right here, and basically, by using any new generation iPod or smartphone with a camera, you can scan these QR codes for additional information on, say, how the photograph was taken, and as well as text and like the aperture settings, the shutter speed, and what kind of lens that was even used. Anyway, here's my photo right here. I took this during the racing regatta in Annapolis, but of course, as a photographer, I can't always be here presenting that to you. So, if you simply use any smartphone that has the ability to scan these QR codes, it'll take you online, and you can view all the extra content in which this photograph was taken.
This photo was taken during the last day of the Filmmaking and Photography Boot Camp, one of the pre-orientation experiences, in August 2010. The day started out bleak with overcast skies, and after a photo walk around downtown Annapolis and the U.S. Naval Academy, we met up with the other pre-orientation groups and boarded a large powerboat for a dinner cruise while overlooking the Annapolis Yacht Club's Wednesday night races. The odd weather was accompanied by a west wind, which gave us an infrequently seen spinnaker start, where each boat would raise their spinnaker right after the starting gun. After the last start, we moved in behind the starting line and up the northern side of the course, as the sun came out from behind the clouds. Perfect timing, we passed the sailboats, putting the sun behind them as we moved along, giving us the opportunity to silhouette each boat as we headed out into the bay. As the students enjoyed the dinner aboard the boat, we cruised up the bay, passed under the Annapolis Bay Bridge, around Sandy Point Lighthouse, and back under the Bay Bridge with the setting sun hanging low in the sky. We re-entered the Severn River just after sunset, and were presented with a full moon that began to rise out of the northeast. The photographer, Chris Stokes, mentions he took the photo during the regatta, and he had been trying all day to get a group of sailboats in a relative pattern and in the same direction. He also likes how the colors of the individual sails are reflected so crisply against the water.
And I'll be making a web version of this gallery as well for people such as yourselves who might be looking at this from afar and won't be able to make it here in the next month while this exhibit is up. So you'll have the ability to be able to go through and view all the photos, and that's going to link to all the same content, all the same videos, or have the text descriptions and whatnot. So we'll be sharing that with you guys in a future release as well. On another note, I've got another podcast which I actually filmed a couple of months ago, actually, and it's been a lot of work in the editing, so it hasn't been ready to show just yet. But it talks a lot about travel-specific photography, and specifically 2 trips that I have done with a friend of mine who's a photographer to the Southwest U.S. In 2009 and 2010. And so that's something we'll be featuring shortly. But in the meantime, there's a trip that I led somewhat recently. We call it the Chesapeake Bay Photographer Sailing Adventure. And so this was something that was offered to students at Washington College. It was a chance to get out on the water and see the surrounding areas that in a different way than maybe they've seen in the past. We basically went out on a 32-foot sailboat that the college owns, had been donated to us a couple years ago. And 5 students and myself, we went out and we went to Baltimore and Annapolis, by water. And I made a video that kind of describes the trip and what we saw and a little bit about it. So we'll go ahead and show that video now and take a look at that.
During Washington College's 2010 fall break, the Multimedia Production Center hosted a 4-day photography-oriented sailing adventure on the upper Chesapeake Bay. Having learned the history of the area we planned to cover and an introduction to marine navigation, these students were getting their first exposure to cruising aboard a sailboat on the Chesapeake Bay. We headed out of Rock Hall, Maryland midday on Thursday with the destination of Baltimore Inner Harbor. We motor sailed to maintain speed through shifting winds in times of heavy rain. While I was at the helm about halfway across the bay, I noticed the engine exhaust sound changed from the muffled engine noise and a periodic spray of water to a hollow sound. I watched over the transom for a few moments to realize the engine was no longer pumping cooling water, and if we continued to run the engine, we'd soon overheat. I shut down the engine and we continued under sail alone. We were still making good time, and I thought it might be easier to troubleshoot once we made our way into the mouth of the Patapsco River where we could drop the anchor out of the shipping lanes. After tacking back and forth against the winds for another hour, we reached Fort Carroll just outside the Francis Scott Key Bridge. The iPad came in really handy for looking up the specific engine model we had and to locate the water pump on the engine, and even a tutorial on getting access to the water impeller. Unfortunately, we found the water impeller was dry rotted with 2 blades missing and the remaining 4 hanging on by a thread. It was a wonder we had made it as far as we had, and we wouldn't be running the engine again until we found a replacement impeller.
Luckily, we had my Zodiac dinghy with us and a 5-horsepower outboard motor borrowed from John Wagner, director of the waterfront. With the dinghy tied alongside us, we ran the outboard engine, pushing us along like a tugboat, which let us hug the edge of the river and stay out of the shipping lanes and out of potential trouble. The weather cleared enough to give us some wonderful photo ops as the sun sat low behind the industrial landscape of the Patapsco River. Between the massive ships and the colorful contrast of the sky and the smoke, we produced some great images. As we eventually made our way the last 10 miles from Fort Carroll to the inner harbor, the bright city lights made photography possible even well after sunset. We arrived late and enjoyed a much-deserved dinner ashore. An evening of shooting urban landscapes from the docks of the marina and a game of poker rounded out our night. Friday morning, I got on the phone right away, part number in hand, and located the impeller we needed, which was a cab ride away. The students explored the waterfront by land, while I made repairs to the inboard diesel engine. I caught up later and we shot panoramic aerial images from the 27th floor observation level of the World Trade Center, the world's tallest pentagon-shaped building. It gave interesting perspective being able to clearly see where we had dropped anchor 10 miles away the day before, and in general getting the bird's eye view of Baltimore. We checked out of the marina just before sunset and dropped 2 anchors beside the USS Torsk and the National Aquarium. With a muddy bottom there, not known for good anchoring, we kept an eye on the buildings around us to gauge our position, ready to reset the anchors if needed. Another evening of shooting, and then we turned in for the night.
It was great waking up on Saturday morning with the World Trade Center staring down on us. For a moment I forgot where I was until I remembered spending the night in the inner harbor. I never would have imagined sleeping next to the Baltimore Aquarium, let alone on a boat. On deck, we listened to the Baltimore Marathon announcements as we ate breakfast and enjoyed the peaceful morning. It was nice to take time to relax and watch the other boats rush in and out of the harbor while we gently rocked in their wake. After we had our fill of cereal, it was our turn to head out. We pulled up our anchors and moved down the river to Annapolis.
We reefed our mainsail and sailed wing and wing down the river with the mainsail to port and the jib to starboard. We passed through several regattas, and I was surprised to see a number of spinnakers up on a lot of the boats. The spinnaker is a large, usually colorful sail that is used primarily for downwind sailing, but with the winds blowing 20 to 25 miles an hour, I explained the danger of blowing out sails or even going into a death roll, where the boat begins to oscillate wildly from side to side, eventually rounding up into the wind uncontrollably. A few minutes later, we saw the boat veering out of control under spinnaker, almost on cue from our discussion. We covered the 10 miles to the Key Bridge in Fort Carroll in no time and headed out of the Patapsco River into the bay. The wind was blowing in the 30s and at times as hard as 40 miles per hour. We lucked out to be sailing on a broad reach with the wind blowing off our stern quarter. Even towing the dinghy and the kayaks against the flow of the tide, we reached speeds of 10 miles an hour heading away from the wind. This made our apparent wind slightly less and made for a fast and comfortable ride. We hugged the western shore to gain protection of the land from the winds. This also gave us a route past 2 lighthouses along the way to Annapolis.
I have driven over the Bay Bridge hundreds of times and often wondered what it would be like to be on the water below the bridge. On our way to Annapolis, we sailed under the Bay Bridge after passing the Baltimore Lighthouse and the Sandy Point Lighthouse. These two structures are vacant and haunting houses along the bay that were amazing to document, but even greater to experience. As we sailed under the bridge, I could see the racing cars above and got some shots of the bridge arching over the bay. The best part of the trip was experiencing the things people see every day through the unique viewpoint of sailing on the water. The skyscrapers of Baltimore and the Bay Bridge all look so different when you're floating by as opposed to driving by.
As we turned to make our approach into the Severn River and eventually Annapolis Harbor, we sailed on a close reach with the winds coming over our starboard bow. The high winds kept lifting the dinghy out of the water and eventually flipped it completely over twice before we made it into the river. We made our way past the Naval Academy and under the Spa Creek Bridge, where we picked up a mooring for the night.
Annapolis has the quaint and hushed atmosphere of a small town, but due to the boat show going on that day, it also had the hustle and bustle that comes with a larger city. This gave us wonderful opportunities to photograph downtown.
After shooting for a couple of hours, we headed back to the boat for a late dinner and to get some rest. Sunday morning greeted us with sunny, warm weather and an accurate wind forecast. Today's breeze would be perfect to travel up the bay to Rock Hall, 12 to 15 miles per hour from the southwest. We dropped the mooring and motored out of a busy harbor toward the bay. We passed several clusters of boats ranging from little Optimist dinghies on the river to mid-sized etchels out on the bay, all part of the Annapolis Yacht Club's fall series. We raised our sails and eventually had another wing and wing run up the bay, under the Bay Bridge, and all the way up to Rock Hall. Our trip concluded at the dock, but the students were already asking about when they could get out on the water again and which sailboats they might have access to at the college's boathouse.
The opportunity to get out on the Chesapeake Bay, out onto these rivers on boats is just really an incredible privilege, I think, for any of us who live in this area, and especially for students who are studying these things. You know, you can read about the Chesapeake Bay and the fact that it's the nation's largest estuary, about its biological productivity and so on. You can hear a professor talk about it in a classroom, and they can put the statistics up on the blackboard or the whiteboard. You know, you can see a PowerPoint which shows you these images of waterfowl blanketing the sky or of crabs coming out of the water, but there's no substitute for experiencing it yourself. There's something about, you know, feeling the wind on your face, smelling the salt, you know, as the chop comes up over the bow of your boat, seeing crabs come out and hearing that bubbling noise that they make as they're in that bushel basket, or actually landing a fish yourself that you just cannot get in a classroom. It's one of the things that I think is so fortunate about being at Washington College. My Lord, to be, you know, so close to urban areas, but in this incredible natural laboratory is really wonderful. So I really encourage students to get out on the water, to get out onto the land as much as they possibly can, because you'll make connections, you'll see things will click in a way that it simply is probably not going to happen simply from reading a textbook. Take advantage of it.
Yeah, it looked like an awesome trip. Unfortunately, I didn't get to go, Brian.
I mean, limited space.
But anyway, I'm sure to go on a lot of trips, but definitely going on trips and adventuring around, taking photographs is an awesome experience.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun, and I hope that's something we can do again in the future, the same kind of a trip.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all we have time for this episode, but stay tuned for the Southwest U.S. trip that, Brian, I'm sure you're still in. You have quite a bit to do with that.
Yeah, we filmed about 2 hours worth of interview, and so that's a bit much to digest, so I'm thinking if we cut it down a bit, it's going to be easier for you guys to sit through it, so rather than to, you know, do 2 hours worth. So that'll be coming up soon, so that's all we have time for today. If you guys have any questions, you can email us at photographyexposed@gmail.com. You can also send us comments about what you think, and we hope to see you guys here next time.
See you guys.